Hey, Annie. You're Annie. Lucas ran down the center aisle of the concert hall in tears, his voice breaking apart with every step. Daniel Whitmore stood frozen beside the front row. The concert program slipped from his hand and fell onto the carpet without him noticing. For what felt like an endless moment, Daniel's mind could not comprehend the sound that had just reached him. He had waited 3 months to hear that voice again. He had spent countless nights awake, longing for even the faintest call, a cough with sound behind it, or a single audible cry. But Lucas had not managed to produce one complete word. And now, in front of hundreds of people, he had called out the name of a girl Daniel had never seen before. Lucas. Daniel snapped out of his shock and rushed after his son. Lucas, did you just speak? His voice trembled. Son, did you really just say that? Lucas did not turn around. Tears streamed down his cheeks as he continued running toward the young server standing near the curtain at the side of the stage. One hand pressed tightly against his throat while the other reached toward her, as though he feared she would disappear if he arrived even a second too late. You wrote. The sound caught in Lucas's throat, making his knees buckle slightly, but he forced himself to keep moving. You wrote it. The orchestra stopped in the middle of the performance. Sebastian Vale lifted both hands from the grand piano. The final notes faded through the vast hall. The choir behind him fell silent as hundreds of guests turned away from the stage to watch the crying teenager running down the aisle. Near the back of the hall, Annie stood motionless beside the silver tray that had fallen from her hands. 2 glasses had rolled across the carpet. One had stopped near the bottom of the curtain, while the other lay on its side beside the small rehearsal piano. Annie's right hand still hovered above the keys, as though she had not yet pulled herself out of the moment. Lucas tore off his headphones and rushed from his row. 2 security guards stepped into the aisle before he could reach Annie. All they saw was an overwhelmed teenager crying and charging toward a member of the event staff. Easy, Mr. Whitmore. One of the guards raised an arm to block him. Slow down. You can't rush the stage. Lucas leaned to one side, trying to slip past him, but the second guard gently took hold of his upper arms. Annie. The name came out so harsh and ragged that it sent a chill through the room. Lucas struggled against the guards and shook his head repeatedly. His throat burned as though it were being torn open, but the desperation in his eyes was even more intense than the pain. He opened his mouth and tried to draw breath, yet only a dry stream of air escaped. Calm down, the guard said. We're only trying to help you. Lucas clenched his teeth. The muscles in his neck tightened. He pressed one hand against the place where the surgical scar had once been fresh, trying to force the vocal cords that had remained silent for 3 months to obey him. Let. The first sound shattered as it came out. Lucas squeezed his eyes shut, his entire body trembling. Let me go. The sentence was broken and uneven. The words collided with one another, rough, distorted, and painful. But the final word came through clearly. Daniel stopped several feet behind them. He stared at his son as though he were witnessing something impossible. Before the operation, Daniel had heard Lucas laughing from upstairs. He had heard him singing along with the recordings in his headphones, arguing about homework, complaining about early mornings, and talking through dinner until Daniel had to remind him to eat. Then, after the surgery, all of it disappeared. For 3 months, Daniel had heard only air passing through his son's throat, painful sounds that never became words, and the cold electronic voice of the tablet Lucas hated. Now, in less than a minute, his son had spoken twice. Let him go. Daniel's voice was low, but it shook violently. One of the guards turned around. Mr. Whitmore, we were only trying to. Take your hands off my son. The guards immediately released Lucas. He staggered when they let him go, but he did not stop. He continued forward on legs that could barely support him until he finally stood in front of Annie. Annie backed away from the piano. Her face had gone pale. No, she said quickly. You have the wrong person. Lucas shook his head fiercely. He pointed at her, then at the piano. You wrote. His voice vanished halfway through the sentence. Lucas clutched his throat and bent forward, taking short, painful breaths. Tears fell onto the front of his formal jacket. Annie instinctively took half a step toward him. Don't force it. You're hurting yourself. Lucas continued shaking his head. He clenched his teeth and tried to gather what little breath he had left. You wrote. A harsh sound came out, then broke apart. He closed his eyes, tightened both fists, and tried again. You wrote that music. Annie glanced toward the staff exit. I only corrected a few notes. Lucas pointed to the name tag pinned to her chest. Annie. Then he turned and pointed toward the stage. On the concert program, the mysterious composer's name appeared in 3 large letters. ANN. Daniel reached them and supported his son by both shoulders. He did not want to restrain him. He was only afraid Lucas's legs would give way. "Lucas, look at me." Lucas did not. His eyes remained fixed on Annie, filled with panic and hope, as though she were the only person in the entire hall who could understand what he was trying to say. Daniel's voice broke. "What did you just say? Say it again for me. Please, son." Lucas swallowed. Even that small movement caused his face to tighten with pain. Daniel saw it. But before he could stop him, Lucas raised one trembling hand and pointed directly at Annie. "She is..." His voice faded. Lucas's throat tightened. No sound came out now, only air rasping between his trembling lips. "Don't force yourself," Annie said. The fear on her face was temporarily replaced by genuine concern. "Please, you just had surgery. You could injure your throat again." Lucas opened his eyes. He looked at her and shook his head so hard that tears flew from his lashes. Lucas drew a long breath. His chest rose with difficulty. He gritted his teeth, tensed his entire body, and forced each syllable through the throat that had remained silent for 3 months. "She..." His body trembled. A painful silence stretched between them. Daniel held his breath. In the distance, Eleanor had risen abruptly from her seat. Annie lifted one hand as though she wanted to stop him, but Lucas used every bit of strength he had left to force the name out. "Annie." The final sound broke into a sob. Lucas's knees gave way, but Daniel caught him before he reached the floor. Daniel stared at the boy in his arms, his eyes red and wet. He laughed, but the sound immediately dissolved into a choked sob. "You spoke." His hands trembled as he held Lucas's face. "Son, you just spoke." Lucas did not answer. He continued staring at Annie. Daniel turned toward her, his expression caught between shock and desperation. "How does he know you?" Annie shook her head. "I don't know. Not true." Lucas forced out the words. Those 2 words alone sent him into a violent fit of coughing. Daniel hurriedly supported his chin, but Lucas continued looking at Annie through his tears. Annie flinched. At that moment, Eleanor Whitmore hurried down the center aisle. The 74-year-old woman lifted one side of her dark blue evening gown to keep from tripping. She was almost running, forcing the guests around her to step aside. "Lucas." She stopped in front of her grandson, one hand pressed against her chest. Her other hand reached toward him, but she did not dare touch him yet. "Sweetheart, was that your voice?" Lucas turned toward her. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Eleanor looked at Daniel, her eyes filling with tears. "I heard him." Her voice shook violently. "Tell me I didn't imagine it." Daniel held his son more tightly. "You didn't imagine it." 3 months. Eleanor began to cry. 3 months without a single word. I had almost forgotten what his voice sounded like. "I know." She bent down and held Lucas's face between both hands. "Can you say something one more time? Just one word. You can call me. You can call your father. Anything." Lucas was exhausted, his breathing still unsteady. He could not answer, but his eyes had never left Annie. Eleanor followed his gaze. She looked at the young woman in the plain server's uniform, then at the piano behind her. The confusion on her face slowly turned into astonishment. "My grandson lost his voice after the surgery," she said. "The doctors told us to prepare ourselves for the possibility that he might never speak again." Her voice caught as she looked at Annie. "And yet, the moment he saw you, he ran across this entire hall and called your name." Annie lowered her eyes. "Mrs. Whitmore, I think everyone has misunderstood." Eleanor had lived long enough to recognize fear, even when someone tried to hide it behind polite words. She stepped closer. "What are you afraid of, Annie?" Annie's head rose immediately. Daniel noticed the change in her expression. It was not surprised that Eleanor knew her name. Annie was printed clearly on her name tag. It was fear that her name had been connected too clearly to those 3 letters. A-N-N. Sebastian Vale left the stage, still holding the sheet music. The irritation that had first crossed his face was gone. In its place was the confusion of a musician who had just realized he might have performed a composition incorrectly in front of the person who had written it. "Miss Nash," he said, reading Annie's last name from the event manager's tablet. Where did you learn that original ending? Annie looked at him. You were given the wrong arrangement. Sebastian frowned. Adrian Kessler's office sent me this version. I know. You know? He opened the score to the climactic passage and held it out in front of her. The notes you just played do not appear here. That's right. Then how did you know them? Annie did not answer immediately. She looked at Lucas. He had started crying again, but he could no longer make a sound. His old headphones rested in one hand. One side had been repaired with black tape, its surface worn smooth from being touched countless times. Annie's gaze settled on the headphones. She seemed to understand what they contained. You listened to the demo recordings, she said softly. Lucas nodded. Daniel looked between them. What demo recordings? Lucas pulled away from his father and took a small notebook from his jacket. He rested it against the wall and held a pen in a hand that trembled so badly the tip repeatedly slipped away from the lines. Daniel stood close beside him, watching his son struggle to write. Each letter appeared slowly, uneven, and distorted by emotion. When Lucas finished, he turned the page toward his father. She talked to me before the surgery. Daniel read the sentence twice. When? Lucas bent over the notebook and continued writing. Online. She didn't know my name. Annie covered her mouth with one hand. Her eyes widened as a memory seemed to return. You're the cello student. Lucas nodded repeatedly. Annie stepped closer. The one who sent me a recording at 2 a.m? Lucas nodded again. The one who asked why the ending sounded like a farewell? Tears filled Lucas's eyes. He nodded once more. Daniel looked at Annie. You knew my son? I knew someone who often asked questions about my music, she replied. He never used his real name. I had no idea he was Lucas. What did you talk to him about? Music, the cello, what it feels like to have too many things inside you and no idea how to begin saying them. Daniel looked at his son. Is that why you recognized her? Lucas placed one hand on the headphones and pointed toward Annie. Daniel turned back to her. Are you ANN? Annie looked toward the guests in their expensive evening clothes, the television cameras near the stage, and the dozens of phones pointed in her direction. Her plain service uniform made her look out of place among the wealthy guests. Red marks from the heavy tray remained around her wrist. A dark stain from one of the spilled glasses still marked the hem of her skirt. Now hundreds of people were waiting for her answer. Annie stepped away from the piano. You have the wrong person. Her voice was so quiet that it was nearly swallowed by the vastness of the hall. No one believed her. She turned toward the staff corridor. Lucas panicked and reached for her sleeve. Don't. The sound came out weakly. Annie stopped. Lucas tried to tighten his grip, but his fingers had almost no strength left. He looked at her with pleading eyes, then tensed his throat one more time. Don't. Go. Those two words left Annie motionless. Daniel felt joy and fear collide inside his chest. His son had found his voice again, but every one of his first words had been meant for a girl Daniel knew nothing about. 3 months earlier, Daniel had believed the tumor was the worst thing that could ever happen to his family. On the morning of the operation, Lucas had still been talking about pancakes, making fun of the hospital coffee, and telling his father about the cello solo he planned to audition for in the spring. Before they wheeled him into the operating room, he had turned back and said, Don't worry, Dad. When I wake up, I'll sing as loudly as I can so you'll know I'm all right. Then the operating room doors closed. Hours later, they opened again. Lucas was still alive, but his voice had not returned with him. Not until tonight. Daniel spun toward Annie just before she could step through the curtain leading to the service corridor. Please don't leave. His voice no longer carried the dignified authority of the billionaire who had addressed hundreds of guests earlier that evening. It was the plea of a father who had just heard his son's voice again after 3 months of despair. Annie stopped. One hand remained wrapped around the edge of the curtain, as though letting go would leave her without enough courage to walk away. Lucas was still holding her sleeve. His fingers were so weak that he could barely tighten them, yet he refused to let go. His breathing came in broken bursts. Each time he tried to open his mouth, his throat contracted and his face turned pale with pain. Eleanor hurriedly bent beside her grandson. She placed one hand on his shoulder while the other trembled as she brushed back his sweat-dampened hair. That's enough, sweetheart. Tears continued streaming down her face. You've tried hard enough. I heard you. Your father heard you too. You don't have to say anything else. Lucas shook his head. He pointed at Annie, then at the name tag pinned to her chest. Annie. Daniel took the notebook from his son. His hand shook so badly that the tip of the pen stopped several times before he managed to write. "Can you breathe normally?" Lucas read the question and nodded, though his other hand remained pressed tightly against his throat. The sight made Daniel's heart clench. Over the past 3 months, he had learned to recognize every small change in his son's face. A frown could mean pain. Turning away could mean despair. A hand pressed to his throat sometimes meant Lucas was trying to produce a sound and could not. Tonight, he had spoken. Daniel was overwhelmed with the urge to pull his son into his arms, yet terrified that those hard-won sounds might cause further damage. A woman in a black evening gown made her way through the crowd gathered around the aisle. Dr. Evelyn Shaw was a longtime guest of the Whitmore Foundation and had taken part in the consultations following Lucas's surgery. One look at his face was enough for her to issue an immediate order. "Daniel, take him into the reception lounge beside the stage. Right now." She turned to Lucas, her voice firm but gentle. "No more talking, not another word." Daniel wrapped an arm around his son to support him, but Lucas planted his feet against the floor and refused to move. "Lucas, we're only going inside so the doctor can examine you," Daniel said. Lucas continued shaking his head, his eyes never leaving Annie. Eleanor followed her grandson's gaze and turned toward the young woman. "I think he's afraid you'll leave." Annie stood there in her plain server's uniform, surrounded by expensive evening clothes and the brilliant lights of the concert hall. She looked at Lucas and tried to maintain her distance, but the pain on his face slowly broke through the defenses in her eyes. She stepped closer. "I'm not going anywhere yet," she told him. "Go inside and let the doctor examine you first." Lucas stared at her for a long moment, as though he needed to make sure she was not merely trying to comfort him. Annie gave him a slight nod. "I'll stay." Only then did he allow his father to help him into the reception lounge. Eleanor walked close beside her grandson, one hand constantly supporting his back. Dr. Shaw instructed the staff to bring warm water, clear the passageway, and prevent anyone from approaching the door. The guests remained in the concert hall. Quiet conversations began spreading through the rows of seats and drifted through the curtain. Daniel heard several people mention Lucas. Someone else whispered the name A.N.N. He understood that what had just happened was no longer a private family matter. Dozens of phones had recorded the moment Lucas ran across the hall and called Annie's name. By morning, social media would be flooded with shortened videos, speculation, and countless conflicting versions of the story. But at that moment, Daniel did not care. He looked only at his son. Dr. Shaw placed 2 fingers against Lucas's wrist and counted his pulse before leaning closer to listen to his breathing. "Any sharp pain?" Lucas shook his head. "Any pressure or heaviness in your throat?" He held up 2 fingers. "Just a little?" Lucas nodded. "Are you dizzy?" He shook his head again. Dr. Shaw studied his throat for several more seconds before turning to Daniel. "He needs complete vocal rest tonight. No speaking and no whispering. Whispering can sometimes put even more strain on the larynx than speaking normally." But he spoke. Daniel said it as though he needed someone else to confirm the miracle one more time. "You heard him, didn't you?" "I heard him. You said his vocal cords might no longer have enough movement to form words. I said his chances of recovery were uncertain." Daniel stepped closer. 3 months, Evelyn. For 3 months he couldn't produce one complete word. Tonight he called that girl's name. More than once. "I know. Then what does this mean?" Dr. Shaw kept her voice steady, though even she could not completely hide her astonishment. "It proves that some laryngeal function remains, but I cannot determine the extent of his recovery based on a few words produced during an intense emotional response." Daniel ran a hand through his hair. "Is it a good sign?" "It is a reason to hope." Those words alone brought tears to Daniel's eyes. He turned away for a moment. For 3 months, no doctor had dared use the word hope in front of him. They had spoken of possibilities, damage, therapy, adaptation, and acceptance. Tonight, for the first time, someone had told him there was still something to hope for. Lucas pulled the notebook toward himself and began writing quickly. His trembling letters overlapped because he still had not regained control of his emotions. He held up the page. "Annie has to stay." Dr. Shaw read it and raised an eyebrow. "That is not a medical decision." Lucas immediately bent over the notebook and added beneath it, "Tonight it is." Eleanor read the message, wiped her tears, and gave Daniel the look that had ended countless arguments in the Whitmore family over the decades. "You heard him speak. Now you can read what he wants." Daniel turned toward Annie. She remained near the door, her hands clasped in front of her. No one had ordered her to leave, yet she looked like someone who had grown accustomed to being reminded that she did not belong in places like this. "Would you sit with Lucas for a few minutes?" Daniel asked. Annie looked at the boy. "I don't want him trying to speak again because of me." "Neither do I. He needs to rest." "I know." Lucas lightly tapped the chair beside him. The plea in his eyes made it impossible for Annie to refuse. She walked over and sat on the edge of the chair, leaving a small space between them. The moment she sat down, the tension slowly left Lucas's shoulders. His hand loosened from his throat, and his breathing gradually became steadier. Daniel noticed everything. A strange emotion rose inside him. He was grateful that Annie's presence calmed his son. But somewhere deep within him, he also felt a sharp ache. For 3 months, he had taken Lucas to the finest specialists. He had installed therapy equipment in their home, canceled meetings, postponed business trips, and spent countless nights beside his son's bed. Still, Lucas had built a wall no one could cross. Annie simply sat down, and his son responded as though someone had finally opened a door for which none of them had been able to find the key. Sebastian Vale appeared in the doorway, carrying the altered score. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, "but I need an answer before I return to the stage." Dr. Shaw immediately pointed toward Lucas. "You are not to question him." "I'm not asking him." Sebastian looked at Annie. "I'm asking her." Annie lowered her eyes to the sheet music in his hands. "You shouldn't play the ending the way it appears in that score." Sebastian opened it to the final movement. "Why not?" "Because it changes the entire meaning of the piece." "How?" Annie hesitated. Everyone was looking at her, but when she began speaking about music, her voice changed. It remained soft, yet became clear and certain. "The piece is about someone who has been trying to speak for far too long while everyone around them has already decided not to listen." Sebastian looked down at the score. "And the pause you played? It isn't an empty silence. It is the moment that person gathers enough courage to try one final time." Annie pointed to a measure near the end. "The final chord must come after that pause. If you play straight through, the ending becomes triumphant." "And it isn't supposed to be?" Annie shook her head. "No." "Then what is it?" Something said without receiving an answer. Sebastian studied her closely. "But the piece ends there." "No," Annie said softly. "It stops there. Those are not the same thing." Sebastian tightened his grip on the edge of the score. "How do you know exactly what the composer intended?" Annie raised her eyes. For a moment, all hesitation disappeared from them. The answer nearly escaped her. Before she could speak, however, Mrs. Keller appeared in the doorway. The woman was in her 60s and had spent long enough managing hotel events to remain composed even while delivering unpleasant news. "Annie, may I speak with you outside for a moment?" Lucas immediately tightened his grip on the notebook. Annie turned toward him. "I'll come back." He looked directly into her eyes. "I promise," she added. Only then did Lucas's hand slowly relax. Daniel stood and followed her into the corridor. Mrs. Keller waited until the door closed behind them before lowering her voice. "I've received 6 complaints. 2 glasses were broken, and a client wants to know why a server interrupted the performance." "She didn't interrupt it," Daniel said. "She corrected the music." Mrs. Keller turned toward him. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm trying to handle this respectfully." "Then begin by not blaming her before you understand everything that happened." Annie lowered her head, her face reddening with embarrassment. "Mrs. Keller, I'll pay for the 2 glasses." Mrs. Keller looked at her. "This is not about 2 glasses. I dropped them. I'll take responsibility. The staffing agency just called. They want you removed from the floor until the footage has been reviewed." Daniel's expression immediately hardened. "You're suspending her over 4 measures of music?" "She left her assigned position during a live performance. Those 4 measures made my son speak after 3 months." Mrs. Keller glanced toward the reception lounge. "I understand that what happened means a great deal to your family, but I still have procedures to follow." Annie reached behind her, untied the apron, and removed it. "It's all right." Daniel looked at her. "No, it isn't." Annie carefully folded the apron before handing it to Mrs. Keller. "Please tell the others I'm sorry. They'll have to cover my work until the event is over." There was no anger in her voice. That made the moment even more painful for Daniel. She had just been removed from her job in front of hundreds of people. Yet her first concern was for the coworkers who would have to carry the extra workload. Mrs. Keller's expression softened. "Annie, I haven't said you're fired. I understand. The agency only wants to review what happened. I understand, Annie answered calmly, but her hand gripped the edge of her uniform so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Her phone vibrated inside her pocket. Annie took it out. The moment she saw the caller's name, her expression changed. She immediately turned the screen face down against her palm. Daniel had already seen it. Kessler Arts Group. Why is Adrian Kessler calling you? Annie slipped the phone back into her pocket. He isn't calling me. His name was on the screen. Annie started toward the exit. You should go back to your son. Daniel followed her for several steps. Lucas wrote that you spoke with him before the operation. Online, we only discussed music. I didn't know who he was. And yet he recognized you after only 4 measures? He recognized the way the music was written, not the way it was performed? Annie stopped. No, the way it was written. Yes. Daniel moved in front of her, but kept enough distance that she would not feel cornered. Are you ANN? Annie's phone vibrated again. She took it out, declined the call, and turned off the screen. Mr. Whitmore, your son needs a doctor, not a composer. He has doctors. Then listen to them. I have been listening to them for 3 months. Daniel's voice suddenly grew heavy. I have listened to them tell me my son may never speak again. I have listened to them tell me we need to be patient. I have listened to them say we must help him accept a life without a voice. He looked directly at Annie. But tonight, Lucas ran across that entire concert hall and called your name. Annie did not respond. Daniel continued, lowering his voice. I don't know who you are. I don't know what Adrian Kessler wants from you. And I don't understand why you are wearing a server's uniform while a musician like Sebastian Vale has to stop and ask you how a piece should be played. Annie looked over his shoulder. Through the open doorway, Lucas was sitting beside Eleanor. He was not watching the doctor or his father. He was staring toward the corridor, waiting for Annie to return. The composure on her face began to crack. Daniel saw it too. I am not asking you to tell me your entire life story, he said. I am only asking you not to disappear before I understand why my son believes you matter so much to him. Annie's phone vibrated for the 3rd time. A new message appeared. She opened it. The color immediately drained from her face. Daniel caught only the final line before she locked the screen. Do not say another word. Was that message from Kessler? Annie pushed the phone deep into her pocket. I have to go. She had taken only 1 step when a sound came from the reception lounge doorway. Lucas was standing there. Dr. Shaw stood directly behind him with one hand on his shoulder. When Lucas tried to open his mouth, she immediately raised a warning finger. No speaking. Lucas tried to produce a sound, but only air escaped through his lips. He bent over the notebook in his hands and wrote so quickly that the pen nearly tore through the page. Then he held it toward Annie. Please come back. Annie read the words. Tears quickly filled her eyes and blurred her vision. She turned her face away for 1 second, trying to regain control. But Lucas continued waiting. He did not try to speak again. He simply held the notebook against his chest, his eyes pleading with her not to disappear the way others had disappeared from his life. If Lucas and Annie touched your heart, please like this video, comment where you are watching from, and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring and heartwarming stories. Annie walked back toward him. 1 meeting, she told Daniel. He immediately nodded, but she raised a hand to stop him from speaking. His doctor must be present. Agreed. No press. Agreed. No cameras. I agree. You will not use my name to promote your foundation or your company. Daniel hesitated briefly, then answered, I agree. And you will not promise Lucas that I can help him speak again. I don't want him placing his hope in something I cannot guarantee. Daniel looked at his son. No promises. Annie held his gaze. And I do not work for you. I understand. She studied him for several seconds, as though trying to decide whether a man accustomed to solving every problem with money truly understood what she meant. Then Annie walked over and knelt in front of Lucas. She did not touch his throat. She did not ask him to try producing another sound. She simply placed one finger on the notebook. Until the doctor gives you permission, you have to use this. Lucas looked at her. What happened tonight was real, Annie said. You do not have to hurt yourself to prove it to anyone. Emotion flickered in Lucas's eyes. He lowered his head and slowly wrote one question. Will you play? Annie read it. She looked at the old headphones hanging around his neck and at the worn black tape holding one side together. Then she remembered the cello student who used to send her recordings at 2 in the morning. Annie gave a slight nod. Yes. Lucas looked up. A fragile spark of happiness appeared in his eyes, still red from crying. Annie rested her hand on the page and continued, but next time, you will choose the first note. Lucas added another question. Why? A faint smile appeared on Annie's lips. Because music does not always have to begin with the person who wrote it. She gently touched the tip of the pen in his hand. Sometimes, it should begin with the person who has waited far too long to be heard. The next morning, Lucas sits in an examination chair at Dr. Shaw's clinic with a tablet resting on his knees. Daniel stands near the window, answering messages with one hand while watching every movement the doctor makes. Dr. Shaw guides a flexible camera through Lucas's nose and studies the monitor. Lucas grips the sides of the chair but does not pull away. When the examination ends, she removes her gloves and turns the screen toward Daniel. There is movement, she says. Limited, but more than we recorded at his last appointment. Daniel steps closer. How much more? Enough to explain what happened last night. Then he can speak again. Dr. Shaw gives him a measured look. He produced several words under intense emotion. That does not mean he can sustain ordinary conversation, but it means the nerve is recovering. It may be recovering. Other muscles may also be compensating. I need you to hear the difference. Daniel presses his lips together. He has spent years reading technical reports, challenging forecasts, and finding advantages hidden inside cautious language. He wants to do the same now, but Lucas is watching him. Dr. Shaw turns to Lucas. Your throat is irritated, but there is no serious damage. I want 2 days of complete vocal rest. After that, Dr. Cole can begin with controlled airflow and very short sounds. Lucas types on his tablet, Annie is coming today. Daniel reads it and answers before the doctor can. We can move the visit. Lucas shakes his head. Dr. Shaw pulls up a chair. You may see her, but you do not speak. Not even one word. Do you understand? Lucas nods. Writing is fine. Tapping is fine. Music is fine if Dr. Cole approves it. No shouting. No whispering. And no trying to repeat what happened at the concert. Lucas types another question. Did she make my voice come back? Dr. Shaw reads it carefully. No. She gave you a reason to use the function you still have. That matters, but it is not the same as repairing your throat. Lucas lowers his eyes. Daniel expects disappointment. But Lucas types again. Then there is still something there. Dr. Shaw smiles. Yes, there is still something there. Daniel looks away before either of them sees how much that answer affects him. By noon, the concert has become the most discussed event in Seattle's arts community. Short clips appear online despite the foundation's efforts to control the footage. One shows Annie at the rehearsal piano. Another captures Lucas calling her name. Most versions end before anyone understands what happened. Daniel's communications director calls 3 times. On the 4th call, Daniel answers. We need a statement, she says. Reporters are asking whether Lucas experienced a medical emergency and whether the server is connected to ANN. No statement about Lucas. They already have video. That does not give them the right to his medical information. What about Annie Nash? Daniel pauses. No statement about her either. Mr. Whitmore, silence creates speculation. Then let them speculate. He ends the call and sees Lucas watching him. The boy types. You usually tell people everything. Only when it helps, Daniel says. Lucas raises one eyebrow. Daniel almost laughs. Fine. Sometimes I tell them because I dislike not controlling the story. Lucas types. This is not your story. Daniel reads the sentence, then nods. You're right. At 3 that afternoon, Annie arrives at the Whitmore estate with Denise Nash and a gray-haired pastor named Samuel Brooks. Daniel had expected her to come alone. He understands immediately why she has not. He greets Denise first. Mrs. Nash, thank you for coming. Denise is fine. Daniel then. Pastor Brooks offers his hand. We appreciate you allowing us to sit in. You're welcome to stay. Annie wears jeans, a dark sweater, and the same guarded expression she carried when she left the concert. She holds a worn canvas bag against her side. Daniel notices that she checks the driveway before entering. Did someone follow you? He asks. No, that wasn't what I asked. Annie looks at him. A black car stayed behind us for 6 blocks. It turned away near the gate. Daniel signals to his security director. Check the exterior cameras and the street feed. Annie's shoulders tighten. I don't want this becoming bigger. It already is. That doesn't mean you get to take control. Denise places a hand on her daughter's arm. Let him check the cameras. Checking is not the same as deciding for you. Daniel accepts the correction without responding. Dr. Cole waits in the music room with Lucas. The piano lid is raised, and Lucas's cello rests on a stand near the wall. When Annie enters, Lucas rises halfway from the bench, then remembers Dr. Shaw's instruction and remains seated. He lifts his tablet. You came back. Annie sets down her bag. I said I would. She introduces Denise and Pastor Brooks. Lucas types a greeting to each of them. Eleanor joins the group carrying a tray with coffee, iced tea, and a plate of oatmeal cookies she insists are better than anything the caterers served the night before. Store-bought? Denise asks. Eleanor looks offended. At my age, I've earned the right to let people think I baked them. Denise laughs, and some of the tension leaves the room. Dr. Cole sits beside Lucas. Today has one rule: no voice. Lucas nods. Annie approaches the piano but does not sit. Last night you asked me to play. Today, you choose where we begin. Lucas opens a music application on his tablet. Instead of selecting one of A.N.'s famous compositions, he taps a recording labeled Draft 17. Annie's fast changes. The track begins with a low cello line, followed by 5 piano notes and a pause that lasts just longer than expected. You still have this? She asks. Lucas nods. Annie turns to Daniel. This was never released. How did he get it? I sent it to an anonymous account 2 years ago. Lucas types. You said it was unfinished. Annie reads the next line as it appears. I said the ending sounded afraid. A small smile touches her face. You said it sounded like someone standing outside a door. Lucas adds. You said maybe they were waiting to be invited in. Annie sits at the piano. I remember you now. Daniel remains near the doorway. Last night, Annie was a stranger. His son somehow recognized. Now he sees that a connection already exists between them, built through messages and music while he knew nothing about it. Annie places her fingers on the keys. All right, no voice today. We'll use rhythm. She plays the 5 opening notes. Lucas taps twice against the side of the bench. Annie answers with 2 lower notes. He taps again, changes the pattern, and waits. She follows. The exchange continues without instruction. Dr. Cole observes Lucas's breathing, but does not interrupt. Denise and Eleanor sit together near the fireplace. Pastor Brooks closes his eyes as if listening during a Sunday service. Daniel watches his son communicate without anger or embarrassment. Lucas is not being tested. He is leading. After several minutes, Annie stops. Lucas quickly types. Why did you change the ending? I didn't. He turns the screen toward her. Qu'est-ce que tu? Annie looks toward the windows. Her phone begins vibrating inside the canvas bag. She does not reach for it. Daniel sees the same fear return. Is it him? Annie remains seated at the piano. He knows I'm here. How? I don't know. The phone stops, then starts again. Lucas types one final sentence and raises the tablet so everyone can read it. Don't let him make her disappear again. Daniel reads the sentence on Lucas's tablet, then looks at Annie's vibrating bag. Answer it. Annie shakes her head. That's what he wants. What does he want? To hear whether I'm frightened. The phone stops. A few seconds later, Daniel's security director appears at the music room door with a tablet in his hand. The black sedan passed the front gate twice, he says. The license plate is registered to Kessler Arts Group. Daniel's jaw tightens. Save the footage. Annie stands. I should leave. Lucas strikes the piano bench with his palm, once and hard. He raises his tablet. That is what he wants. Dr. Cole moves closer to him. Keep your breathing steady. Lucas points at Annie, then toward the driveway. Annie reads his meaning. My staying here won't stop Adrian. No, Daniel says, but leaving because he sent a car teaches him that it worked. She turns toward him. You don't know how he works. Then tell me. Annie glances at Denise. Her mother gives a small nod but does not answer for her. He never threatens anyone directly, Annie says. He calls it advice. He says he's concerned about your future, your family, your reputation. Then something disappears. A payment, a job, a recommendation. By the time you understand what happened, everyone thinks you did it to yourself. Pastor Brooks folds his hands over his cane. Men like that count on shame doing the work for them. Daniel asks his security director to wait outside, then closes the door. Does Kessler control your music? He controls the accounts that distribute it. Does he own the copyright? He says he does. That wasn't my question. Annie's expression hardens. I signed papers when I was 16. My mother needed treatment. He told me the agreement was temporary. Denise looks down at her coffee. I didn't know the full terms. You were sick, Annie says. I was still your mother, and I was trying to keep you alive. The strain between them carries years of choices neither can undo. Eleanor sets her cup down and speaks without raising her voice. A family can love each other and still make decisions out of fear. That doesn't make the love false. It means the fear had too much authority. Denise studies her for a moment. You've had practice saying that. More than I care to admit. Lucas begins typing. Did he change draft 17? Annie returns to the piano but keeps her hands in her lap. He changed the ending after I refused to add a larger final chord. Why? He said audiences wanted hope. Lucas types again. The original had hope. Annie reads the screen. It just didn't lie. Her eyes fill before she can hide it. She touches the worn tuning fork inside her bag, then takes it out and places it on the piano. My father gave me this, she says. He used it when he tuned old stage pianos. He said a room full of expensive instruments could still be wrong together. You needed one honest note to prove it. Lucas reaches toward it, then pauses for permission. Annie hands it to him. He taps it gently against the rubber block Dr. Cole provides and places the bass against the wooden side of his cello. The vibration travels through the instrument. Lucas closes his eyes, feeling rather than speaking. Dr. Cole watches his shoulders settle. That's enough for today. Lucas immediately shakes his head. It is not a punishment, she tells him. Your body has done more than usual since last night. Rest is part of the work. He types. She just got here. And she can come back, Dr. Cole says. Everyone turns toward Annie. She remains quiet. Daniel senses that another offer from him would push her toward the door. He waits. Lucas writes more slowly this time. I don't need you to make me talk. Annie reads the next line. I need you to help me hear what I sound like now. Her face changes. The request reaches a place Daniel's money cannot touch. One session, she says. Then we decide whether this helps you. Lucas points toward Dr. Cole. With her here, Annie adds. Every time. He nods. Daniel says, I'll arrange transportation. No, Annie replies. I can get here myself. Someone followed you. Then your security can watch the road. I'm not getting into one of your cars every time I leave home. Daniel accepts the limit. All right. And no recording unless Lucas agrees. Lucas types. Record music. Not me. Dr. Cole nods. We can record instruments without capturing private conversation. Annie looks at Daniel. No foundation videos. No recovery campaign. No story about a billionaire finding a hidden composer. I understand. You keep saying that. Because I'm trying to. For the first time, Annie almost smiles. The front door chime sounds through the house. Daniel's security director returns and speaks quietly from the doorway. Mr. Whitmore, Adrian Kessler is at the gate. Annie rises so quickly that the piano bench shifts across the floor. Daniel steps between her and the hallway. He isn't coming inside. He won't accept that. He doesn't have to. Daniel takes the security tablet and activates the gate speaker. Adrian's face appears on the screen, composed and familiar from arts magazines and televised benefit concerts. Daniel, Adrian says, I believe someone on your property has taken materials connected to my company. No one here has taken anything. I'd rather discuss this privately. There is nothing private about sending a car to follow Annie Nash. Adrian's expression barely changes. Annie is young. She misunderstands professional boundaries. From across the room, Annie speaks before Daniel can answer. I understand them now. Adrian hears her. Annie, come outside. We can resolve this before you make a decision you'll regret. Lucas grips his tablet. Dr. Cole places a calming hand near his wrist without restraining him. Daniel watches Annie. Your choice. She looks at the gate screen, then at Lucas holding her father's tuning fork against his cello. "No," she says. Adrian pauses. "No? I'm not coming outside. You signed an agreement. I was 16. You received every benefit promised to you. My name disappeared." Adrian's voice loses some of its warmth. "Be careful." Annie lifts her chin. That sentence used to work. Daniel disconnects the speaker. A moment later, the black sedan turns away from the gate. Annie sits at the piano again, though her hands still tremble. Lucas raises the tuning fork and waits. She strikes one key matching its pitch. Lucas taps twice against the cello. Annie answers with 2 notes. Daniel remains near the doorway, finally understanding that his first responsibility is not to direct what happens next. It is to make sure no one interrupts it. The final note fades from the cello, but Lucas keeps the tuning fork pressed against the wood as if the vibration might remain inside his hand. Annie waits until he lowers it before returning the instrument to its cloth pouch. Dr. Cole checks the time. "We stop here." Lucas reaches for his tablet. "You said 1 session." "I did," Annie says. "This wasn't a session," Kessler interrupted. Daniel almost objects to the accusation in the wording, then sees Annie trying not to smile. "He has a point," she says. "He usually thinks he does," Daniel replies. Lucas types, "Tomorrow." Dr. Cole answers before anyone else. "Tomorrow you rest." The following afternoon, we try 20 minutes. No voice work, unless Dr. Shaw approves it. Lucas lifts the tablet toward Annie. "Will you come?" Annie looks at Denise, who gives her no direction. The choice remains hers. "Yes," Annie says, "but you follow the rules." Lucas nods. "And if Dr. Cole says stop, we stop." Another nod. "And your father stays out of the session?" Daniel raises an eyebrow. "Out of the room? Out of the process," Annie says. "He can sit wherever Dr. Cole allows, but he doesn't set goals, count sounds, or ask Lucas to repeat anything." Daniel looks toward his son. Lucas types, "Agree." "All right," Daniel says. "I agree." 2 days later, Daniel sits behind the glass wall of the estate's small recording room. He has removed his watch and placed it beside his phone. The phone lights up twice during the first 5 minutes, but he leaves it untouched. Inside, Lucas sits with his cello between his knees. Dr. Cole places a narrow strip of tissue paper on a stand in front of him. "We begin with air," she says. Not speech. Lucas's expression tightens. Annie sits at the piano. "You don't have to impress the paper." He gives her an irritated look. "That's good," she says. "Use that." Lucas points to his tablet. "How?" "Move the paper like you want it out of your way." He looks doubtful but leans forward and releases a controlled stream of air. The tissue barely shifts. Daniel feels his body move toward the glass. He stops himself. Dr. Cole resets the strip. Again, but shorter. Lucas tries. This time the paper bends and rises. Annie plays one soft note. Lucas glances toward her. "That was the sound of the paper moving," she says. He tries a 3rd time. The breath breaks halfway through. Annie plays a note that breaks with it. Lucas frowns and types, "You played it wrong. I played what happened. It sounded bad. It sounded unfinished." He looks at the piano, then at the tissue. Dr. Cole moves the paper aside. "Now we add vibration, nothing forced. If you feel pressure, stop." Lucas places 2 fingers lightly against his throat. He releases air, but no sound follows. Annie presses one low key and lets it fade. He tries again. A thin vibration forms, then disappears. Daniel grips the edge of his chair. Lucas looks ashamed. Annie does not praise him or ask him to repeat it. She waits until he looks at her. "I heard you," she says. Lucas looks down at the cello. Dr. Cole asks, "Do you want to continue?" He nods. The second attempt produces a rough tone that lasts less than a second. Annie finds the nearest piano note and plays it with him. The sound from Lucas remains weak, but beside the piano it no longer seems isolated. He tries once more. His tone slips lower. Annie follows without correcting him. Lucas reaches for the tablet. "I can't hold it." Dr. Cole reads the sentence. "Not yet." Daniel sees his son's shoulders tense at the phrase. Annie notices too. "Don't hold it." Lucas turns toward her. "Let it arrive and leave," she says. "You don't have to trap it." He types, "Then what is the point?" "The point is that you made it." Lucas shakes his head. Annie opens her canvas bag and removes her phone. She scrolls through several files, then places it on the piano. A recording begins. A younger Annie plays a difficult passage, misses the same interval twice, and strikes several keys in frustration. A man's voice speaks from behind the recording. Finish the song before you decide what it means. The recording ends. Lucas looks at her. My father, Annie says. I wanted to delete that file. He wouldn't let me. Lucas types. You were bad. Denise laughs from the corner. He's comfortable with you now. Annie gives Lucas a level look. I was terrible. He types. You got better. I finished before I judged the whole song. Lucas reads the sentence twice. Dr. Cole places the tissue paper back on the stand. One final attempt. Lucas closes his eyes. Annie places her hands above the keys but does not play. He releases a slow breath. The paper moves. A quiet tone follows. Uneven at first, then steadier. Annie joins him with a single note. The tone lasts nearly 2 seconds. When it ends, no one celebrates. Dr. Cole records the duration on her chart. Annie lifts her hands from the piano. Lucas keeps his fingers at his throat, registering what his body has done. Daniel's phone lights up again behind the glass. He turns it face down. Lucas opens his tablet. That doesn't sound like me. Annie reads it. Not the way you remember. I hate it. You're allowed to, Dr. Cole adds. But hating it today doesn't decide how you'll feel forever. Lucas presses the playback button on the recorder. His tone enters the room through the speakers, rough and unfamiliar. He stops it immediately. Daniel rises, but Annie signals for him to wait. Lucas plays it again. This time he listens to the end. Annie moves to a different section of the piano and builds 3 quiet chords around the recorded tone. She changes the harmony, not the sound itself. The same voice that seemed strained a moment earlier now becomes the center of something larger. Lucas plays the recording a 3rd time. Annie adds the chords again. He types, You made it sound better. No, she says. I changed what surrounded it. Lucas looks through the glass at Daniel. His father does not smile too widely or raise a hand in celebration. He only sits where Lucas can see him. Dr. Cole ends the session and reminds Lucas to rest. Annie begins packing her music. Lucas types one final question. Can we write something with it? Annie poos. With your voice? He nods. She looks at Dr. Cole. Safely? Short sounds, controlled range, no pressure, Dr. Cole says. We build around what he can do, not what anyone wishes he could do. Annie turns back to Lucas. Then we start with today's sound. Lucas touches the playback button again. The rough tone fills the room. This time, he does not stop it. Over the next 2 weeks, Lucas's voice returns in fragments rather than sentences. Some mornings he can hold a low tone for nearly 3 seconds. On others, air passes through his throat without sound. Dr. Cole treats both results as information, but Lucas does not share her patience. He sits at the piano with his tablet propped against the music stand while Annie plays the chords they created around his first recorded tone. Lucas types, It was better yesterday. Dr. Cole checks the notes from the previous session. Yesterday you slept almost 9 hours. Last night you slept 5. That shouldn't change everything. It doesn't change everything. It changes today. Lucas presses 2 fingers against his throat and attempts the tone again. The sound starts, breaks, then returns at a lower pitch. He shuts his eyes and strikes the edge of the bench with his palm. Annie repeats the rhythm on the piano. Lucas opens his eyes. Don't, he whispers. The word is thin but understandable. Dr. Cole lifts one hand. Stop there. Lucas points toward Annie. She knows what you meant, Dr. Cole says. You don't need to prove it again. Annie removes her hands from the keys. I wasn't making fun of you. Lucas types. Then why copy it? Because you made a sound before the word. I thought you might want to hear it differently. I didn't. Then I won't use it. Her answer comes without argument. Lucas watches her for a moment, then deletes what he had begun typing. Daniel observes from behind the glass. His watch remains in his pocket now, but a legal pad sits on his knee. He has written the length of each tone, the number of spoken words, and every sign of fatigue. Dr. Cole notices the page when she steps out to speak with him. You agreed not to count. I'm taking notes. You're measuring him. I run a medical company. Data matters. In my clinic, yes. In his relationship with his father, not always. Daniel lowers the pad. How am I supposed to know whether he's improving? Ask him how he feels. He may not answer. Then wait. Daniel looks through the glass. Lucas is showing Annie a cello pattern on his tablet. She tries it at the piano, gets it wrong, and Lucas shakes his head with a small smile. He talks to her, Daniel says. He communicates with her. He trusts her. Dr. Cole follows his gaze. That is not something she took from you. Daniel knows she is right, which makes the answer harder to accept. Inside the room, Annie plays the phrase again. Lucas types, "Too clean." What does that mean? It sounds like you knew where it was going. I did know. He shouldn't. Who? The person in the music. Annie considers this, then plays the phrase with a pause before the last note. Lucas taps once. She changes the pause. He taps twice. On the third attempt, he lifts his hand in approval. Daniel enters after Dr. Cole allows it. What are you working on? Lucas points toward Annie. He says the person in the music doesn't know where he's going, she explains. Daniel looks at the notes. Is that Lucas? Annie turns to the piano. It doesn't have to be. Lucas types. It is. Daniel sits beside him but does not touch the tablet. Do you want me to hear it? Lucas hesitates, then nods. Annie begins with the rough vocal tone recorded during the previous session. A low cello line follows. The piano enters carefully, almost finding its way by touch. Each time the music appears ready to settle, Lucas's tapping pattern shifts it elsewhere. When it ends, Daniel waits before speaking. It sounds uncertain. Lucas types, "Good." Daniel reads the word and nods. Then it works. He does not ask whether the composition can become more hopeful, Annie notices. Later that afternoon, Annie finds Lucas in the kitchen, trying to pour iced tea, while keeping his tablet balanced under one arm. She takes the tablet, not the pitcher. "I've got this," he whispers. "I know. I'm holding the expensive part." Lucas pours the tea and places the pitcher down. Annie hands back the tablet. He types, "Dad thinks I like you more. Your father thinks too much." Lucas almost laughs. The sound comes out as a faint rush of air. Annie smiles. That counted. He frowns. "Not as therapy," she says, "as a joke." Lucas types, "He tries too hard. He's afraid." "Suwangwi." "I know." Lucas studies her, then types, "Are you afraid of Kessler?" Annie takes time before answering. "Yes, but you said no to him." Being afraid and saying no can happen at the same time. Lucas looks toward the hallway, making sure Daniel is not nearby. "I'm afraid to hear my voice in front of people." "Then don't start with people." "I hear it. That's different." He types, "I sound weak." Annie opens her phone and finds an old recording. Listen. A younger version of Annie plays a complicated passage, misses 2 notes, starts again, and misses them differently. From somewhere off the recording, her father tells her to finish before judging the entire song. Lucas listens to the end. "You heard part of this before," Annie says. "Not all of it." The recording continues. Annie finally reaches the last chord, but the tempo changes several times, and one note remains wrong. Lucas types, "Why keep this? My father saved it." "Why?" "He said one day I would need proof that improvement doesn't erase where you started." Lucas plays the recording again. That Saturday, Daniel takes him to a diner near Lake Washington. They arrive early, before the lunch crowd. Daniel has reserved the corner booth, but Lucas chooses a seat near the counter instead. An older waitress named Carol approaches with 2 menus. She recognizes Daniel but directs her question to Lucas. "Blueberry pancakes." Lucas nods. "Extra syrup?" He lifts one finger. "1 extra." "Still don't trust your father around the bottle?" Lucas smiles. Daniel says, "I haven't spilled syrup in years." Carol pours coffee into his cup. "A man's reputation lasts longer than the evidence." Lucas produces a breathy laugh. Carol does not react as though anything unusual has happened. She places the menus down and says, "Take your time. I'll put the order in." Daniel watches her walk away. She remembered. Lucas types. She waited. Daniel understands. Carol had not answered for him, praised him, or turned his voice into a public event. She had simply given him the seconds he needed. When the pancakes arrive, Daniel reaches for his phone as it vibrates. He sees the company chairman's name and turns the device face down. Lucas notices. Daniel cuts into his pancakes. "I'm here." Lucas looks at him for a long moment. His lips part. Duh. The sound breaks. Daniel remains still. Lucas tries once more. "Dad." It is quiet, rough, and complete. Daniel's eyes fill, but he does not ask him to repeat it. He only reaches across the table and places his hand beside Lucas's. "I'm here," he says again. Lucas leaves his hand there. Across the diner, Carol tops off another customer's coffee, while rain moves down the windows. No one applauds. No one raises a phone. For Daniel, that makes the moment feel more real. By the time Daniel and Lucas return from the diner, Annie is already in the music room with Dr. Cole. She is arranging handwritten pages on the piano when Lucas enters. Daniel follows a few steps behind, still carrying the sound of one word in his mind. "Dad." He wants to hear it again, but he keeps the request to himself. Annie notices the change in Lucas before he sits down. Something happened. Lucas opens his tablet. "I ordered pancakes." Daniel removes his coat. "That isn't the whole story." Lucas gives him a warning look. Annie smiles. "Then I'll wait until he decides it is." Dr. Cole checks Lucas's session notes. "No sustained tones today. We'll work with rhythm and written composition." Lucas places his cello between his knees. Annie plays the opening phrase they developed earlier, but he raises one hand before she reaches the final note. He types, "I want to know why Kessler changed your music." Annie's fingers leave the keys. "That isn't part of your therapy. It is part of the song." Dr. Cole looks at Annie. "You don't owe anyone an explanation." "I know." Lucas types again. "You knew me before I knew you. I want to know who I was talking to." Annie reads the sentence twice. Denise sits near the window with a cup of tea, allowing her daughter to decide. Daniel remains by the door. Annie closes the piano score. "My father's name was Calvin Nash. He worked backstage at theaters around Seattle. Lighting, wiring, repairs whatever they needed. Sometimes he tuned pianos when the regular technician couldn't come." She removes the tuning fork from her bag and turns it between her fingers. "He gave me this when I was 11. We didn't own a piano, so I practiced at church, at the public library, and in empty rehearsal halls after he finished work." Lucas types, "Did you take lessons?" "Some, mostly from people who had 20 minutes and felt sorry for my father." Denise corrects her. "They respected him. Some respected him. Some liked having someone around who never complained." Pastor Brooks is not with them today, but his influence remains in the way Denise speaks, firm without trying to win. Annie continues, "My father could hear when one key was slightly off. He said an entire orchestra could agree on the wrong pitch, and that still wouldn't make it right." Lucas gestures toward the tuning fork. "That was his honest note," Annie says. Daniel asks, "How did Adrian Kessler find you?" Annie looks toward him. "I found him." Denise lowers her cup. Annie says, "After my father died, my mother's health got worse. Bills came every week. I was 16 and thought talent would matter if the right person heard it." Daniel does not interrupt. "I sent Adrian 3 recordings. He called the next morning. He said I had written something composers twice my age couldn't write. Then he asked where I studied, who represented me, and whether my family could afford an attorney." "He asked that directly?" Daniel says, "Not in those words. Adrian never says the cruel part first. He lets you feel grateful before he tells you the price." Lucas types, "What did he promise?" "A scholarship. Studio access. Money for my mother's treatment. He said he would introduce the music before introducing me." Denise speaks quietly. "I knew he was helping with expenses. I didn't know what Annie signed. I didn't show her everything," Annie says, "because you knew I would object. Because you were missing appointments." Denise takes a moment before answering. "You were 16. Keeping me alive was not supposed to become your responsibility. We didn't have anyone else." Daniel recognizes the sentence. He has heard versions of it in boardrooms and hospital corridors, spoken by people who believe necessity excuses every cost. "What was in the agreement?" he asks. Adrian called it a development contract. He registered the recordings through his company, handled distribution, and controlled publicity. I was supposed to remain anonymous until he decided the market was ready. For how long? There was no real end date. Lucas types, Y-A-N-N, my initials. Annie Noel Nash. At first I liked it. Nobody saw my clothes, my neighborhood, or my age. They heard the music before deciding who could have written it, Daniel says. Then the recordings became successful. Annie nods. Adrian started calling himself my arranger, then my collaborator. After that, interviewers called him the creative mind behind A-N-N. He never corrected them. Did you? I tried. Her phone lies beside the piano. She turns it face down even though it has not rung. The first time I objected, a payment for my mother's treatment arrived late. The second time, Adrian said the scholarship committee had concerns about my behavior. The third time, he reminded me that breaking the contract could leave us owing his company more money than we could earn. Lucas's hands tighten around the edge of the tablet. He stole it. Annie looks at him. He built a system where taking it appeared legal. That doesn't make it legal, Daniel says. No, it makes it expensive to prove. Daniel's expression changes. Let me see the contract. Annie shakes her head. I didn't tell you this so you could take over. I'm not taking over. You hear a problem and start assigning people. I know attorneys who handle intellectual property, and Adrian knows judges, donors, publishers, and half the arts boards in this city. That is not a reason to surrender. Annie closes her bag. It is easy to say that when losing a fight means bad press instead of losing your apartment. Daniel accepts the rebuke. Then tell me what help would not feel like control. The question catches her unprepared. Denise watches him more closely now. Annie says, information. Nothing filed, released, or negotiated without my approval. Agreed. My own attorney. Agreed. And if I decide not to fight, you don't decide that I'm too frightened to understand my own life. Daniel takes a breath before answering. Agreed. Lucas types. You should fight. Annie looks at him. You told your father not to fix you. Lucas pauses, then writes. This is different. No, she says. It isn't. You get to decide what happens to your voice. I get to decide what happens to mine. Lucas lowers the tablet. A few seconds later, he types. Then I hope you fight. Annie's face softens. That I can accept. Daniel's phone vibrates. His security director is calling from the front gate. He answers. What is it? A visitor. Mr. Whitmore. Adrian Kessler. Through the window, a black sedan turns into the drive. Annie closes her hand around the tuning fork. Lucas reaches for his tablet, but Daniel speaks first. No one invites him inside until Annie decides whether she wants to see him. Annie keeps her hand around the tuning fork, while the black sedan stops near the front entrance. Daniel does not move toward the hallway. You decide, he says. Lucas raises his tablet. Don't see him alone. I won't, Annie replies. Denise stands and smooths the front of her sweater. Then we meet him together. Daniel calls the gate. Let Mr. Kessler in. Bring him to the library. Annie turns toward him. Why the library? Because it has 2 doors, no recording equipment, and enough chairs for everyone who needs to be there. She considers the answer, then nods. Dr. Cole remains with Lucas while Daniel, Annie, and Denise cross the hall. Lucas follows despite the therapist's suggestion that he stay in the music room. Daniel looks at him. You don't have to be part of this. Lucas types. He came because of me too. Annie reads the screen. Then you listen. You don't force your voice. Lucas nods. Adrian Kessler enters the library carrying a leather folder. He is dressed for a board meeting rather than an argument, with a gray suit, dark tie, and the calm expression of a man who expects every room to adjust around him. Daniel, he says. Thank you for seeing me. Daniel does not offer his hand. Annie agreed to hear what you came to say. Adrian turns toward her. Anna, my name is Annie. Of course, the correction is smooth enough to sound courteous, but Annie's fingers close tighter around the tuning fork. Adrian notices Lucas near the fireplace. I understand you had an emotional evening. Lucas does not respond. Daniel says, Speak to Annie. You didn't come here to discuss my son. Adrian opens the folder and removes several pages. I came because confidential materials connected to my company were performed without authorization. The situation can still be resolved quietly. Annie looks at the papers but does not take them. I played 4 measures that I wrote. You played a protected arrangement during a public event. It wasn't your arrangement. Adrian gives a patient smile. This is why professional agreements exist. Memory is unreliable. Ownership records are not. Denise steps closer to her daughter. She was 16 when she signed those papers. She had representation. No, she didn't. She had a parent. I was receiving treatment and was never shown the full agreement. Adrian's expression remains controlled. Mrs. Nash, your family accepted substantial financial support. Annie answers before her mother can. You paid enough to keep us dependent and called it generosity. That is an unfair description of a relationship that gave your work a national audience. You hid my face. I protected the project. You told me audiences would question whether I could write the music. I told you the market responds to presentation. Daniel steps toward the desk. Say what you mean. Adrian turns to him. You understand branding. The ANN identity created curiosity, without allowing unrelated factors to distract from the compositions. Her age, her neighborhood, and the color of her skin were not unrelated factors to you, Daniel says. They were the reason you thought she could be controlled. Adrian closes the folder. Be careful, Daniel. You are making accusations based on one side of a complicated business relationship. I'm listening to the side that was never allowed into the interview. Lucas lifts his tablet. Why did you change draft 17? Adrian reads the question, then looks at Annie. You showed him unreleased material? I sent him a draft before I knew who he was. That file was company property. Lucas types again. You changed the ending. I improved the ending. Annie's voice remains quiet. You made it louder. I made it suitable for performance. You removed the pause. The pause weakened the conclusion. The pause was the conclusion. Adrian gives her the look of an instructor correcting a student. Annie, talent is not the same as judgment. You had raw ability. I gave it structure. You gave it your signature. For the first time, irritation shows beneath his calm manner. He returns the papers to the folder. I did not drive here to revisit every creative disagreement. A video from the gala is circulating. Reporters are asking questions. You will release a statement confirming that you worked as an assistant under my direction and that the performance was a misunderstanding. No. Adrian looks at her as though he has heard the wrong answer from an employee. You should discuss this with your mother before placing her medical care at risk. Denise moves between them. Do not use my health against my daughter. I am stating practical consequences. The support attached to our agreement may end if Annie violates its terms. Daniel's voice hardens. Any payment needed for Denise's current treatment will be covered, while Annie obtains independent legal advice. Annie turns toward him. Daniel, no conditions, he says. No rights to your music. No public announcement. It only prevents him from using a hospital bill as a leash. Adrian looks at Daniel. You are entering a dispute you do not understand. I understand pressure disguised as assistance. You may reconsider when your board learns you are financing a contractual attack against one of the foundation's largest arts partners. Daniel does not answer immediately. The threat is specific enough to matter. Whitmore Biotech is preparing for a federal review, and several directors already question the attention surrounding Lucas. Adrian sees that Daniel understands the cost. Your company employs thousands of people, he continues. They should not pay for Miss Nash's confusion. Annie's face tightens. There it is. Adrian turns to her. You never threaten the person in front of you, she says. You point at everyone standing behind them. I am offering you a way out. No, you're offering me the same hiding place. Adrian picks up the folder. Then I will let the attorneys explain what happens next. Lucas moves closer and raises his tablet. She wrote the music. Adrian glances at the screen. You are very devoted to someone you barely know. Lucas begins typing again, slower this time. I knew her music before I knew your name. Adrian's mouth tightens. Daniel opens the library door. The meeting is over. At the entrance, Adrian pauses beside Annie. Once this becomes public, admiration will not protect you. People enjoy mysteries. They are less kind to the person behind them. Annie takes the tuning fork from her pocket and holds it where he can see it. My father said a whole orchestra can follow the wrong note. Adrian looks at the small instrument. He also said it only takes one honest note to expose it, she adds. Daniel's security director escorts Adrian outside. Through the front windows, they watch the sedan leave the drive. Denise touches Annie's shoulder. You all right? No, Annie says, but I said no. Lucas lifts his tablet. Being afraid and saying no can happen at the same time. Annie recognizes her own words and gives him a tired smile. You remember everything. He points toward the music room. They return to the piano. Dr. Cole checks Lucas's breathing before allowing the session to continue. Annie places the tuning fork against its rubber block. One clear pitch moves through the room. Lucas taps a pattern on the body of his cello. 3 short beats, a pause, then one more. Annie answers with a low chord. He changes the rhythm. Daniel stands near the doorway and listens as the pattern becomes the beginning of something neither of them has written before. Annie takes a pencil and writes a temporary title at the top of the page. The voice between notes. Before she can play the next phrase, Daniel's phone lights up with a message from his board chairman. Emergency meeting. Tomorrow morning. Kessler has contacted the directors. Daniel arrives at Whitmore Biotech before 8 the next morning. The boardroom windows overlook downtown Seattle, but no one pays attention to the rain moving across the glass. 12 directors sit around the table with printed reports, legal summaries, and copies of the video from the charity concert. The board chairman, Harold Bennett, places his reading glasses beside the folder in front of him. Adrian Kessler says you are sheltering a former contractor who violated a confidentiality agreement. Annie Nash is not hiding, Daniel says. She is receiving independent advice. On your property, she was there for a supervised music session with Lucas. One director glances at the paused video on the wall monitor. Annie stands beside the rehearsal piano in her service uniform while Lucas runs toward her. The press does not see a music session, she says. They see a billionaire bringing an 18-year-old employee into his private home after she interrupts his gala. Daniel keeps his voice controlled. Then the press should be given accurate information. Accurate information requires evidence, Harold replies. Do you have proof she composed the work? I have reason to believe her. That is not proof. It is enough to investigate. Another director closes his folder. Kessler supports 3 hospital programs connected to our foundation. He also has relationships with investors involved in our federal device review. This dispute can affect thousands of employees. Daniel hears Adrian's language repeated almost word for word. Point to everyone behind the person being threatened. Make resistance look selfish. What are you asking me to do? He says. Harold slides 2 prepared statements across the table. The first says the foundation is reviewing an unauthorized incident at the concert and has no reason to question Kessler Arts Group's ownership records. The second says Miss Nash acted independently and is no longer connected to the Whitmore family. Daniel reads neither statement. She helped my son speak. That is a private family matter. You used it 5 minutes ago to explain why I should distance myself from her. Harold folds his hands. I am asking you to separate gratitude from judgment. Daniel stands. And I am asking this board not to protect a powerful man simply because the person accusing him once carried a serving tray. He leaves without signing either statement. By noon, the concert video has spread beyond Seattle. Music channels replay the moment Annie corrects the climactic passage. Viewers compare her hands with old studio clips posted under the ANN account. Some call her a fraud. Others ask why the supposed creator of millions of streamed recordings has never been interviewed. Daniel's communications director calls while he drives home. We need to respond, she says. Kessler's office has released a statement. What does it say? That Annie was a junior assistant who contributed minor ideas under his supervision. They describe her recent behavior as emotionally unstable. Daniel's grip tightens on the steering wheel. Do not repeat that phrase in any company statement. They are also suggesting she used Lucas's condition to attract attention. She tried to leave. That part is not in the video. Then say nothing about her until she chooses what to say. Silence will let Kessler define her. Speaking for her would do the same. When Daniel reaches the estate, 2 news vans are parked beyond the gate. Security keeps them off the property, but cameras follow every vehicle entering the drive. Inside the music room, Lucas and Annie are working on the voice between notes. Dr. Cole sits beside the recording console. Denise has taken Eleanor to the kitchen, where the two women are preparing sandwiches for everyone despite the staff's offer to help. Lucas taps 4 beats against the cello. Annie writes them into the score, then adds a low piano line. Daniel enters without interrupting. Lucas notices him and types, "Board meeting? Finished. Bad?" Daniel takes a seat near the wall. "They want me to separate the company from Annie." Annie stops writing. "You should." Lucas turns toward her. She continues, "Whitmore Biotech has employees who had nothing to do with Adrian. Their jobs shouldn't be pulled into this." Daniel hears the same argument Adrian used, but Annie is not trying to frighten him. She is trying to protect people she has never met. "I won't use the company in your case," he says, "but I'm not issuing a statement that questions you. You still don't have proof. I have heard enough to know the questions are real." Lucas taps the cello again, harder this time. Annie looks at him. "What?" He types, "Play from the start." She returns to the piano. The piece begins with his recorded tone, followed by a rough cello phrase. The rhythm moves forward, stops, then starts again. Daniel listens until the music reaches the unfinished section near the middle. "You need something there," he says. Lucas immediately types, "No." Daniel points toward the score. "The section loses direction. That is the direction." Annie keeps her hands off the keys. He wants the music to hesitate. "For how long?" Lucas types, "Until it knows what it is." Daniel rises and walks toward the piano. A pause that long will feel empty. Annie looks at him. "Not everything needs to be filled. I'm talking about the structure." So is he. Daniel reaches for the score. "Let me see the transition." Lucas pulls the pages away. "I'm only trying to help," Daniel says. Lucas's face tightens. He touches his throat, then looks toward Dr. Cole. She says, "Use the tablet if speaking feels forced." Lucas shakes his head. He draws a careful breath. "Don't." Daniel steps closer. "You don't have to speak." Lucas lifts one hand, asking him to stop. "Don't. Fix." His voice breaks. Dr. Cole tells him to rest, but he keeps his breathing controlled and finishes the sentence. "Don't fix me." Daniel stops. Lucas presses one hand against the score. "I'm not wrong." The words are slow and rough, yet each one reaches his father. Daniel lowers his hand. "I know." Lucas's eyes fill with anger. Daniel corrects himself. "No. I didn't know. I kept telling myself I was helping because I was afraid to admit I couldn't control what happened to you." Lucas watches him. Daniel takes the progress chart from beside Dr. Cole's chair. It contains dates, sound lengths, pitch ranges, and goals he asked her to track. He folds it once and places it face down. "I won't decide what your voice should become," he says. "You decide." Lucas types. "And the music?" "That too." Annie plays the piece again. This time Daniel listens through the long pause without interrupting. The space does not feel empty. It feels like someone gathering enough courage to continue. When the final note ends, Daniel says, "Now I understand it." Lucas raises an eyebrow. Daniel gives a small nod. "I'm learning." From the kitchen, Eleanor calls that lunch is ready. Denise has made grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup. Lucas closes the cello case, and Annie gathers the score. Before they leave, Daniel's phone displays a news alert. A photograph of Annie fills the screen beneath a headline questioning whether the mysterious ANN is an imposter. Annie reads it over his shoulder. Below the headline is the address of her family's apartment building. The address remains on Daniel's phone for less than 10 minutes before the article is updated, but the damage is already done. Denise calls a neighbor, who tells her that 2 reporters and a freelance photographer are standing across from the apartment building. Someone has taped a note to the front entrance asking whether ANN lives there. Annie takes out her keys. "I'm going home." Daniel blocks the doorway with his body but keeps several feet between them. "Not while reporters are outside. My mother's medication is there. I'll have someone bring it." "No. I'm not sending your staff through our apartment." Denise touches Annie's arm. "Pastor Brooks can get it. The church has a spare key." Annie looks at her mother. "You shouldn't have to hide because of me." "We aren't hiding," Denise says. "We're choosing where to stand." Daniel contacts security and asks them to monitor the apartment from a public street without approaching the building. He offers the Nash family rooms at a hotel, but Denise refuses. Our church has a guest apartment above the fellowship hall, she says. It isn't fancy, but people know us there. Daniel starts to object, then remembers what Lucas told him less than an hour earlier. Don't fix me. He nods. Tell me what support you want. Transportation for my dialysis appointment, Denise says. Nothing with tinted windows. I don't want people thinking I've been taken somewhere. I'll arrange a regular car. And no security inside the church. Outside only. Annie notices how hard he is working not to make another decision for them. It does not erase her fear, but it keeps her from leaving in anger. By late afternoon, members of Pastor Brooks's congregation have formed an informal schedule. A retired bus driver takes Denise to the clinic. 2 women from the choir bring groceries. An older man who once worked courthouse security stands near the church entrance and politely directs reporters back to the sidewalk. Daniel sees people with limited money provide something his wealth has not managed to create, a place where Annie is known before she becomes a headline. His phone rings as the Nash family prepares to leave. Harold Bennett does not bother with a greeting. The board is meeting again tonight. I won't be there. You need to be. Kessler has contacted 3 investors and 2 hospital partners. Our federal review team is asking whether company funds are being used in a private legal dispute. They are not. Then issue a statement. I already refused. Harold lowers his voice. Daniel, this is no longer only about your family. We employ 11,000 people. Protecting them is not cowardice. Daniel looks toward Annie. She cannot hear Harold, but she recognizes the argument from Daniel's face. What statement do you want? Daniel asks. That Miss Nash is no longer residing on your property, that Whitmore Biotech has no position on the authorship dispute, and that any contact between her and Lucas is private and temporary. The first 2 points are technically true. The third turns Annie into a risk Daniel is gradually removing. I'll speak to you tomorrow, Daniel says. There may not be a tomorrow for this decision. Daniel ends the call. Annie waits until Denise and Eleanor have walked ahead. What do they want? To separate the company from the situation. And from me. They're worried about investors. Are you? Yes. The honesty surprises her. Daniel continues. I'm responsible for people whose paychecks depend on that company, and I'm responsible for my family. I know. No, you understand the words. That isn't the same thing. Lucas steps into the hallway with his tablet. What happened? Daniel considers simplifying the answer, then decides against it. The board wants a public statement saying Annie is no longer staying here. Lucas types, "Don't do it." Annie says, "They don't need to lie. I am leaving." Lucas turns toward her. "The reporters know where my family lives," she says. "Your company is under pressure. I can work with you from somewhere else." Daniel hears an opening and makes the wrong choice. That may be best for now. Annie's expression changes. He tries to explain. Only until the attention settles. The sessions can pause while the attorneys review the contract. You want me out of sight. I want you safe. Adrian calls it safety too. That isn't fair. No, Daniel. Fair would have been believing me before belief became expensive. I do believe you, but not enough to let people see you standing beside me. Lucas strikes the side of his tablet with his palm. Dr. Cole steps between him and the argument. Lucas, keep your throat relaxed. He points at Daniel and tries to speak. No. The sound is strained. Daniel moves toward him. Use the tablet. Lucas pushes it aside. You're sending. His voice fails. He tries again with more force. You're sending her away. Dr. Cole places a hand near his shoulder. Stop. Now. Lucas pulls away and presses one hand to his throat. Annie approaches him. Your father isn't making me leave. I'm choosing to go. Lucas shakes his head. Tears gather in his eyes as he tries to force out her name. Nothing clear emerges. Dr. Cole tells him to rest. But his breathing grows uneven. Daniel calls Dr. Shaw, who instructs them to bring Lucas to the clinic. The examination shows inflammation from overuse. No permanent new injury is found, but Dr. Shaw orders several days without speech exercises. He had progress, Daniel says. Now it's gone again. It is not gone, Dr. Shaw replies. His throat is tired, and he is upset. Recovery does not move in one direction. Lucas sits beside them with his arms folded. Daniel crouches near his chair. I'm sorry. Lucas does not look at him. I was trying to protect everyone. Lucas takes the tablet and types. You protected the company. Daniel reads the sentence. Lucas adds another. You didn't protect her. That evening, Annie leaves the estate with Denise. She places the unfinished score of The Voice Between Notes inside her canvas bag but leaves a copy on the piano. Lucas watches from the upper hallway. Daniel remains several steps behind him. When the car reaches the gate, Lucas opens his tablet. His hands move slowly now. Bring her name back. Daniel closes his eyes for a moment. I will try. Lucas turns the screen toward him again. Don't try. Choose. The next morning, Daniel receives a call from Sebastian Vale. I kept the score Kessler's office sent me, Sebastian says. I also found an earlier rehearsal file. The notes are different, and there's an email telling me not to compare versions. Send everything to me. I'm not sending it to your company. Daniel understands the condition. I'll give you the name of an independent attorney. There's something else, Sebastian says. Someone accessed the Whitmore recording system last night. Daniel goes to the music room and opens the project folder for The Voice Between Notes. The files are still there, but the security log shows that a complete copy was made minutes after Annie left. Daniel sends the security log to an independent digital forensics firm before anyone at Whitmore Biotech can touch it. The copied folder contains every draft Annie and Lucas created, including Lucas's recorded voice, the cello patterns, and the unfinished score. Can you identify who accessed it? Daniel asks. The analyst studies the remote session data, not immediately. Whoever entered used an authorized credential. Whose? Yours. Daniel checks his phone, laptop, and home office computer. None shows an active breach. But his credentials have been duplicated. He changes every password and orders the recording system disconnected from the network. Lucas waits beside the piano with Dr. Cole's instruction not to speak. Daniel shows him the security report because hiding it would only repeat the mistake he made with Annie. Lucas types, Kessler took our song. We don't know that yet. Who else wants it? Daniel has no answer. By noon, Adrian provides one. A promotional video appears on the American Arts Honors website. Adrian stands in a concert hall announcing a new composition titled The Space Between Voices. The 30-second excerpt begins with Lucas's tapping rhythm, followed by Annie's piano line, and the same pause they had argued to preserve. Adrian calls the piece his response to the courage of those who struggle to be heard. Lucas watches the video once. He closes the laptop and pushes it away. Daniel calls Annie. She answers from the church fellowship hall. What happened? He has the new composition. Annie says nothing for several seconds. I'm sending you the recording, Daniel continues. Don't speak publicly until the attorney reviews it. You're giving me instructions again. You're right. I'm sorry. What do you want me to do? Bring me the files. All of them. Daniel meets her that afternoon in the Nash family's rented apartment. Reporters have left the sidewalk, but handwritten messages remain taped near the entrance. Some support Annie. Others accuse her of lying. Inside, Denise sits at the kitchen table sorting medication into a weekly container. Pastor Brooks has brought a pot of chicken soup and cornbread from the church kitchen. The ordinary meal steadies the space more than Daniel's security team outside. He places a drive and a printed forensic report in front of Annie. These are the only copies my team handled. The attorney has another set. No one from my company has access. Annie opens Adrian's promotional video on her phone. She listens through the excerpt twice. He changed 3 chords, she says. He moved Lucas's tone to a violin. But the rhythm is the same. Can you prove when you wrote it? The studio files have dates. His lawyers will claim the files were altered. Annie closes the video. Then he wins again. Denise stops sorting the pills. No. Annie looks at her. You can decide not to fight, Denise says, but don't call it his victory before you've made your choice. He has money, lawyers, and every institution that ignored me the first time. And you have the truth. Truth didn't pay the rent. No, Denise says. You did. You served dinners, cleaned banquet rooms, and gave up school. Don't confuse what kept us alive with what was right. Daniel remains near the doorway. He knows the conversation is not his to direct. Annie turns toward him. Why are you still here? Because I need to apologize. You already did. not for the right thing. He places his company identification card on the table. When the board pressured me, I treated you as the risk. I told myself I was protecting employees, but I asked the person with the least power to carry the entire cost. Annie looks at the card but does not touch it. Daniel continues, I have hired an independent attorney. She works for you if you accept her. Not for me or Whitmore Biotech. You choose what is filed, what becomes public, and when I speak. And what do you receive? Nothing. People like you rarely fund something without controlling it. I know. That is one reason you should have your own lawyer. Annie studies him. I will meet her once. That is enough. And if I decide to walk away, the files stay with you. Lucas appears on Daniel's phone through a video call. Eleanor is holding the device for him from the estate. He lifts his tablet toward the camera. Don't let him use my voice. Annie reads the message. Her expression shifts from exhaustion to resolve. He won't, she says. Lucas types again. That sounds like a promise. It is. The following morning, Adrian's attorneys file for a temporary order, preventing Annie from performing or distributing music connected to the ANN catalog. Their statement describes her as a former assistant who breached confidentiality and manipulated private recordings made during Lucas's recovery. The catering agency dismisses Annie before lunch. Her supervisor calls rather than sending a formal email. I'm sorry, Mrs. Keller says. They're afraid every event will become a press scene. I understand. You shouldn't have to. After the call ends, Annie sits alone in the church kitchen with her uniform folded beside her. The black vest still carries a small mark from the tray she dropped at Daniel's concert. Daniel's attorney arrives with worse news. The court has not decided authorship, but it temporarily restricts Annie from publicly performing several disputed works until a hearing can be scheduled. The order does not cover every composition, the attorney explains. It also does not give Adrian permanent rights. It preserves the current arrangement while evidence is reviewed. His current arrangement, Annie says. For now, at the estate, Lucas tries to speak after hearing the news. His throat remains irritated, and the first sound fails. He strikes the piano keys with both hands, then tries again. Daniel catches his wrist before he can force another word. Don't hurt yourself. Lucas pulls away and types. You said you would bring her name back. I will. When? I don't know. Lucas's anger fades into something worse. He closes the tablet and walks upstairs with his headphones in one hand. That evening, Dr. Shaw orders several more days of vocal rest. Dr. Cole suspends every sound exercise. Lucas refuses to enter the music room. Annie calls Daniel after speaking with Denise. We're leaving Seattle for a while, she says. My aunt has space in Tacoma. My mother needs distance from the reporters. Does Lucas know? I'll tell him. He'll think you're giving up. I'm trying to keep my family together. Daniel does not argue. Can I bring him to see you before you go? Annie agrees. At the church, Lucas says nothing. He cannot. And for once, no one asks him to try. Annie gives him the handwritten score of The Voice Between Notes. On the last page, she has written, Your voice begins wherever you decide you are still worth hearing. Lucas touches the sentence, then looks at her. Annie holds out her hand. He places her father's tuning fork in it. Keep it, she says. Lucas shakes his head and presses it back into her palm. He wants her to carry the honest note. The next morning, he watches Annie's car leave the church parking lot. When it turns the corner, he puts on his old headphones. One side cuts out. He removes the padding to check the wire and finds a small memory card hidden beneath the black tape. Lucas had placed it there before his surgery and forgotten it. On the card were 2 years of private messages, unfinished recordings, and Annie's own voice saying her full name long before Adrian Kessler claimed he had created A-N-N. Lucas carries the memory card downstairs and places it beside Daniel's laptop. His hands move quickly across the tablet. This was inside my headphones. Daniel examines the tiny card. Do you remember putting it there? Lucas nods, then types. Before the operation, I saved everything in case the account disappeared. Daniel calls the independent attorney and asks her to come to the estate with a digital forensics specialist. He does not insert the card into his own computer. After the earlier breach, no device in the house can be trusted. The specialist arrives within an hour and places the card inside a protected reader. A folder appears on her screen containing hundreds of messages, audio drafts, and file transfer records. The earliest exchange is dated almost 2 years before the charity concert. Lucas had written under the username Lakecello15, "Your ending feels like someone standing outside a door." ANN had replied, "Maybe they're waiting to be invited in." Daniel reads the message and looks at his son. "You never told me about this." Lucas types, "You would have asked who she was." "I would have, and then you would have found her." Daniel cannot deny it. The specialist opens an audio file marked ANN D17, original. Annie's younger voice comes through the speakers. "This is Annie Noel Nash, draft 17, recorded April 14th at 11:42 p.m. She plays the same passage Sebastian performed at the gala, including the pause Adrian later removed. The file date precedes Adrian's copyright registration by 9 months. The attorney asks the specialist to preserve the card, create verified copies, and document every step. "Is this enough?" Daniel asks. "It establishes a strong timeline," she says. "It supports Annie's claim that she created the material before Kessler registered it. We still need outside confirmation that the files were not altered." Lucas points toward another folder. Inside are photographs Annie sent from a small church piano. A handwritten score rests on the music stand. The date on the phone image matches the audio file. The attorney examines the photograph. "Can we identify the location?" Lucas types, "Her church." Daniel calls Pastor Brooks. 20 minutes later, the pastor confirms that the piano, wall paneling, and hymn board are from the fellowship hall. He also remembers Annie recording late at night after choir rehearsals. "I didn't understand what she was making," he says. "I only knew she stayed after everyone left and locked the side door when she finished." The specialist opens a second audio file. Annie plays a melody that later appears in one of Adrian's award-winning compositions. Halfway through, a man speaks near the microphone. "You need a cleaner ending." Annie answers, "It isn't supposed to be clean." Daniel recognizes Adrian's voice. The attorney raises one hand. "We need formal voice verification. No public release until we complete it." Lucas types, "He will say it is fake." "He may," she says. "That is why we build the case before we speak." Another name appears in the file notes. Walter Green, sound engineer. Daniel's attorney searches profession. He agrees to a video call only after the attorney promises not to record him without permission. Walter appears on screen wearing reading glasses and a faded mariner's sweatshirt. He studies the file list for several minutes. "I remember these," he says. "You worked on them?" the attorney asks. "I cleaned the recordings, removed background sounds, adjusted levels, prepared files for registration. Did you know Annie Nash created them?" Walter looks away from the camera. "Yes." Daniel feels Lucas shift beside him. "Why didn't you say anything?" Daniel asks. Walter removes his glasses. "Because I had a mortgage, a wife recovering from a stroke, and 6 years left before retirement. Adrian reminded me of that whenever I asked questions." "He used her name on any files?" "At first. Then he ordered us to strip the spoken introductions. After that, every project arrived under code numbers." The attorney asks, "Would you testify?" Walter rubs one hand across his forehead. "I told myself I was protecting my family." "So did I," Daniel says. Walter looks at him. Daniel continues, "That explanation does not become more honorable because powerful men use it." Walter gives a tired nod. The girl had a family too. He agrees to provide a sworn statement and copies of old work logs he kept after leaving the company. By evening, the attorney has enough evidence to request an urgent review of the temporary court order. She also warns Daniel that the legal process may still move slower than Adrian's scheduled performance. The American Arts Honors will take place in 4 days. Daniel's phone rings before she finishes speaking. Harold Bennett asks him to join a private call with Adrian's attorneys. The settlement offer arrives in writing. Annie will receive $2 million. Denise's treatment will be covered. Lucas may retain limited use of the voice between notes. Daniel will return to active leadership at Whitmore Biotech. In exchange, Annie must remain anonymous, surrender future claims to the ANN catalog, and sign a permanent confidentiality agreement. Daniel reads the document twice. Lucas types, "What will you do?" This is Annie's decision. He sends the offer and all supporting files to her attorney, then calls Annie in Tacoma. She answers after several rings. I've seen it. You do not have to decide tonight. I already decided. Daniel waits. No, Annie says. They will argue that the money protects your family. My family has spent 2 years paying for that protection. Daniel looks at the resignation letter open on his desk. Then I will reject it with you. You could return to your company. Yes. And you're giving that up? I'm giving up the right to use my position as an excuse. He signs the letter electronically and sends it to the board. Harold calls less than a minute later. Daniel declines. Lucas watches him, then types. You chose. Daniel nods. Too late. But yes, the next morning, he drives Lucas to Tacoma. Dr. Shaw has approved travel but not speech. The repaired headphones rest around Lucas's neck. They find Annie in her aunt's small duplex, packing Denise's medication for the return trip to Seattle. When she sees them, she stops. Daniel remains near the entrance. Lucas has something for you. Lucas removes the headphones and hands them to Annie. She puts them on. The recording begins with his tapping rhythm, followed by cello and the unfinished piano passage. At the end, Lucas's voice enters. Weak but deliberate. Don't let him play our song. Annie closes her eyes until the recording ends. When she removes the headphones, Lucas holds up his tablet. We found your name in the music. Daniel places the verified evidence report on the table. Annie reads the first page, then looks at her mother. Denise takes her hand. You don't have to be fearless. Annie turns toward Lucas. Are you going to the awards? He nods. To speak? Lucas types. Only if I choose. A small smile reaches her face. Good answer. She takes her father's tuning fork from her bag and strikes it against the rubber block. Lucas places the bass against his cello and feels the note pass through the wood. Annie listens until the vibration fades. Then we go back to Seattle, she says, and this time he hears the original ending. The Seattle Civic Arts Theater is already surrounded by satellite trucks when Daniel's car reaches the service entrance. Reporters stand behind metal barriers, calling Annie's name as soon as she steps onto the sidewalk. She wears a dark coat over a white shirt and black service vest, the same uniform she wore at the Whitmore concert. Daniel notices. You could change inside. I chose this. You don't owe anyone an explanation. I'm not explaining it. I'm reminding them where they first decided I didn't matter. Denise comes out of the second car in a navy church dress, supported by Pastor Brooks. Behind them, members of the congregation arrive in a rented bus. Most have seats in the upper balcony, paid for through a collection taken after Sunday service. An older woman from the choir hugs Annie. We didn't come all this way to let you walk in alone. A reporter pushes a microphone over the barrier. Annie, are you claiming Adrian Kessler stole every composition credited to ANN? Daniel's security team moves forward, but Annie raises one hand. My attorneys will present the evidence, she says. Tonight I'm here for the music. Are you planning to interrupt the broadcast? No. Will Daniel Whitmore speak for you? Annie looks toward Daniel before answering. Mr. Whitmore can speak about what he witnessed. He cannot speak as me. Daniel gives a small nod. That is correct. Inside the theater, the air carries the smell of old curtains, coffee, and fresh paint. Volunteers guide guests through the lobby while musicians pass through with instrument cases. Portraits of former conductors line the walls. Most are older white men. Lucas walks between Dr. Shaw and Dr. Cole with his repaired headphones around his neck. He has not spoken since the recording he made for Annie. Dr. Shaw approved one short statement if he chooses to make it, but she warned him not to push beyond what his throat can support. Dr. Cole leads him into a dressing room away from the main stage. You have 3 choices, she says. You may use your tablet. You may let the attorney play the recording. Or you may say the sentence we practiced. Lucas types. I know. I'm repeating it because people may pressure you once the cameras start. No one can make me. Daniel stands near the door. She's right to remind you. Lucas turns the tablet toward him. Will you try? Daniel reads the question. No. Lucas waits. Daniel adds, I won't ask you to speak. I won't ask you to remain quiet. Whatever you decide is yours. Dr. Cole studies Daniel, then gives an approving nod. Lucas types, what if nothing comes out? Then nothing comes out, Daniel says. The evidence remains true. Lucas lowers the tablet. Annie enters with her attorney, Rachel Moreno, who carries 2 sealed folders and a flash drive containing the verified archive. Sebastian Vale follows them, still dressed in rehearsal clothes. The network reviewed the first report, Rachel says. They will not stop Adrian's performance without a court order. Did the judge respond? Daniel asks. Not yet. The emergency request is pending. Sebastian closes the door. Adrian moved the performance earlier in the program. We have less than 20 minutes. Can the orchestra refuse? Annie asks. Some may. Most haven't seen the evidence. They signed contracts to perform the score placed in front of them. Annie looks toward the stage entrance. Then we show them. Rachel shakes her head. Not backstage. Adrian's attorneys will accuse us of interfering with the production. He's about to perform our composition on national television. I know, but we cannot give him a reason to bury the evidence under another claim. Daniel asks, what can we do legally? You may request time from the producers. They may refuse. Sebastian can state that the score is disputed. Annie can remain present as my client. If Adrian begins the performance, stopping him carries risk. What kind of risk? Denise asks. Removal from the building, civil claims, possibly arrest if anyone enters the stage after being warned. Daniel looks at Annie. You don't have to take that risk. Neither do you. I have fewer reasons to fear the consequences. Annie's expression tightens. That doesn't make the decision yours. You're right. Pastor Brooks steps into the room. The balcony is filling. There are music students up there asking whether they'll get to see Annie conduct. Annie gives a nervous laugh. They're expecting too much. They're expecting to see you stand where your work has already been standing. Denise adjusts the collar of Annie's shirt. Your father would have complained that the sleeves need ironing. They do need ironing. He would still have been proud. Annie reaches into her pocket and removes the tuning fork. She strikes it against the rubber block in her bag. The note is quiet, almost lost beneath the activity in the corridor. Lucas places his fingers against the metal stem. Still honest, Annie says. Lucas nods. A stage manager appears at the open door. Mr. Vale, Mr. Kessler needs you at the piano. Sebastian does not move. Tell him I'm reviewing the score. He says the broadcast begins in 12 minutes. Then he can wait one. The stage manager leaves. Sebastian turns to Annie. I should have asked more questions when the music first came to me. You didn't know. I noticed inconsistencies. I accepted Adrian's explanation because it was easier than challenging him. That isn't the same as stealing it. No, but it helped him. Rachel hands him a copy of his sworn statement. You can correct that tonight by telling the truth, not by making yourself the center of it. Sebastian reads the first page. Understood. Daniel's phone rings. Harold Bennett's name appears on the screen. He declines the call. A message arrives immediately. The board will reconsider your resignation if you leave the theater now. Daniel shows it to Annie. They're offering your position back? She asks. If I walk away, you built that company. I did. And thousands of people work there. Yes. Annie studies him. You don't have to lose everything to prove you believe me. This isn't proof. Daniel turns off the phone. It is the consequence of waiting too long to choose. Lucas types. You can still go. Daniel places the phone in his pocket. So can you. Lucas looks toward the stage, where the orchestra begins tuning. Annie sits beside him. You don't have to use your voice for me. Lucas types. I know. Then why are you here? He writes slowly. Because he thinks people will believe him if I stay quiet. Annie reads the sentence and closes her hand around the tuning fork. Fear does not own the last word, Denise says. A monitor in the dressing room switches to the live broadcast. Adrian appears beneath the stage lights, while the announcer praises his lifelong commitment to unheard voices. Lucas's jaw tightens. Dr. Shaw checks his throat one final time. One short statement. Only if it feels safe. Stop at the first sign of pain. He nods. On the monitor, Adrian approaches the conductor's stand. Tonight, he tells the audience, I present my most personal composition. The title appears behind him, The Space Between Voices, composed by Adrian Kessler. Annie rises. Daniel moves toward the door. Rachel catches his arm. Once you step onto that stage, there is no private way back. Daniel looks at Lucas, then at Annie in her service uniform. There shouldn't be. he says. The orchestra lifts its instruments. Adrian raises the baton. Daniel walks toward the stage. Daniel reaches the edge of the stage before the orchestra plays its first note. Stop the performance. His voice enters the broadcast through a floor microphone. Adrian lowers his baton and turns with controlled irritation. Daniel, this is neither the time nor the place. It became the place when you put your name over someone else's work. A movement passes through the audience. Several musicians lower their instruments while others keep them ready. Uncertain whether the interruption is part of the program, two stage officials approach Daniel. One speaks near his shoulder. Mr. Whitmore, you need to leave the stage. Daniel takes a sealed report from inside his coat. The composition scheduled tonight is under an active authorship dispute. Verified files show that Annie Nash created its central material before Adrian Kessler announced it. Adrian sets the baton on the stand. This is a private contractual disagreement being turned into public theater by a man under severe emotional strain. Daniel faces the audience. That is how he does it. He questions the person speaking so no one examines the evidence. The broadcast director cuts the floor microphone. Adrian's voice still carries through the microphone attached to the conductor's stand. Daniel's judgment has been affected by his son's condition. Miss Nash took advantage of that family crisis to promote herself. Sebastian rises from the piano bench. That is not what happened. Adrian turns toward him. Sit down, Sebastian. No. The word reaches every speaker in the theater. Sebastian holds up the score he received before Daniel's charity concert. Your office instructed me to perform an altered version and warned me not to compare it with previous recordings. I followed those instructions. I should not have. That proves a revision was made, Adrian says. Composers revise their work. Then why did you tell me the original writer could not be contacted? Several members of the orchestra begin speaking to one another. The first violinist closes her score. Adrian raises his baton again. We have a broadcast to complete. She does not lift her instrument. Is the authorship contested? My company controls the legal rights. That wasn't my question. Adrian's expression tightens. You are contracted to perform. I am contracted to perform music, not help erase its creator. She places the violin across her lap. A cellist follows, then a horn player. Within seconds, half the orchestra has lowered its instruments. The audience can no longer hear Daniel, but the cameras continue recording him as he places copies of the evidence on the conductor's stand. Rachel Moreno enters from the side with the verified archive and hands one folder to the stage manager. The network has received the same documents, she says. The source files are preserved, and the court has ordered Adrian Kessler's company to retain all related records. Adrian turns toward the stage officials. Remove them. Security personnel move forward, but Sebastian steps away from the piano and stands beside Annie's attorney. Then Lucas appears at the side of the stage. Daniel sees him and immediately moves down the steps. You don't have to do this. Lucas carries his tablet in one hand. Dr. Shaw and Dr. Cole remain close behind him. Adrian notices the cameras turning toward Lucas. This is exactly what I meant. They are using a vulnerable boy to create sympathy. Lucas stops. Daniel places himself between his son and the stage. We can play the recording. You can use the tablet. You can leave now. Lucas looks at him, then types. My choice. Daniel reads it and steps aside. Lucas walks toward the center microphone. Annie comes from behind the curtain, still wearing her white shirt and black service vest. She moves close enough for him to see her but does not tell him what to do. Dr. Cole speaks quietly. Take your time. One phrase, then rest. Lucas grips the microphone stand. He releases a careful breath, but the first attempt produces only air. No one speaks for him. He closes his eyes, resets his breathing, and tries again. Name. The sound is low and uneven. He pauses. Adrian reaches toward the microphone control, but the first violinist rises and blocks his path. Lucas continues. Her name is Annie Nash. The audience responds with a wave of voices, then settles as Lucas raises one hand. A-N-N. He draws another breath. Is Annie. Annie presses her fingers against her lips. Lucas points toward the main screen. Rachel signals to the broadcast technician. The verified archive appears above the stage. A date fills the display, followed by an audio waveform. Annie's younger voice enters the theater. This is Annie Noel Nash. Draft 17. Recorded April 14th at 11:42 p.m. The original passage plays, including the pause Adrian removed. A second screen shows the later registration filed through Kessler Arts Group. Sebastian displays the email instructing him not to compare versions. Walter Green's sworn statement appears next, confirming that Annie's spoken introductions were removed from studio files. Adrian steps toward the conductor's stand. These materials are disputed. Digital records can be manipulated. Rachel answers through the restored floor microphone. The original memory card has been examined by independent specialists. Additional records are being secured under court order. No one is declaring a verdict tonight. We are preventing another public claim from being accepted before the evidence is reviewed. Lucas looks at Adrian. He took. His voice weakens, but he finishes carefully. The music because he thought no one would believe her. Dr. Shaw signals that he has said enough. Daniel reaches him before Lucas has to ask. He takes the microphone away and places a hand near his son's shoulder. You did enough. This time Lucas accepts the words. 2 court officers enter with investigators and approach Adrian's legal team. They serve orders preserving company devices, registration records, payment files, and studio archives. Adrian is not handcuffed or publicly declared guilty, but he is informed that any attempt to alter evidence may lead to further action. He looks toward Annie. You think this gives you a career? No, she says. It gives me my name. The first violinist turns toward her. Do you have the original score? Annie looks at Rachel, who nods. She removes the folded pages from her canvas bag. Would you like us to perform it correctly? The violinist asks. Annie looks down at her service uniform, then walks to the conductor's stand without changing a single piece of clothing. She places her father's tuning fork beside the score and strikes it against the rubber block. One clear pitch reaches the musicians. They tune to it. Lucas takes a seat beside the cello section. Daniel remains beyond the stage lights, refusing every signal inviting him forward. Annie raises the baton. The voice between notes begins with Lucas's tapping rhythm, followed by the low cello phrase and the rough vocal tone he once hated hearing. The orchestra does not hide it. The music forms around it until the damaged sound becomes the reason every other note matters. At the long pause, no one rushes toward the ending. Annie lets the uncertainty remain. Then she gives the final cue. The screen behind her changes. Composed by Annie Noel, Nash, and Lucas Whitmore. The last chord ends without the false triumph Adrian added. For a moment, Annie hears only Lucas's steady breathing beside the cellos. Then Denise begins to cry in the balcony, and the theater rises for the name that had finally reached the stage beside the music. 8 months after the performance, the court issues its first major ruling. Several sections of Annie's old contract cannot be enforced because she signed them at 16 without independent legal representation. Financial records show that Adrian's companies redirected royalties, altered registration documents, and removed Annie's name from files she created. The ruling does not repair every loss. It cannot return the years Annie spent serving dinners while other people received applause for her work. It cannot restore the opportunities she was denied or erase the articles that called her unstable before anyone examined the evidence. It does, however, return control of the ANN catalog to her. Adrian loses his positions on 3 national arts boards. Orchestras suspend performances of the disputed compositions while investigators review the remaining records. Other musicians begin filing claims against his company, including 2 former students who had remained silent for years. Walter Green testifies before a federal panel. When a reporter asks why he waited so long, he does not defend himself. I was afraid of losing my pension, he says. Annie was afraid her mother would lose medical care. I treated my fear as responsibility, and hers as something I didn't have to see. Sebastian Vale gives up part of the income he earned from performances connected to the disputed works. He also issues a public apology without asking Annie to stand beside him. I trusted the name on the page because it came from a powerful office, he says. A musician should know better than to confuse authority with truth. Annie watches the statement once, then turns off the television. Denise sits across from her at the kitchen table, checking the schedule for her next clinic appointment. Her treatment has become more stable, though she still has difficult weeks. Do you believe him? Denise asks. I believe he regrets it. That wasn't my question. Annie considers the difference. I believe he's trying to do something useful with the regret. Denise nods. That's about as much as most people can offer. Annie completes her high school equivalency requirements and accepts a scholarship from a conservatory that agrees in writing that she will keep control of every composition she creates. She hires Rachel Moreno as her permanent attorney and chooses a manager who answers to her rather than to a record company. When several major publishers compete for her catalog, Annie declines the largest offer. Daniel asks why during a meeting at the church fellowship hall. They offered more money than the others combined. They also wanted approval over what I write for the next 7 years. Daniel closes the proposal. Then it isn't the right agreement. Annie studies him. You didn't tell me which one to choose. I noticed. That must have hurt. More than I expected. She smiles. You're improving. Daniel funds a legal support program for young composers through an independent charitable trust. Annie and a board of working musicians control the program. Daniel receives no ownership rights, no approval over artistic decisions, and no seat at the head of the table. At the first public meeting, he sits in the third row. Lucas's recovery continues without a clear finish line. His voice remains quiet and rough. Long conversations tire him, and some mornings he returns to the tablet because speaking requires more strength than he has. He no longer throws the device. Dr. Cole helps him combine speech, writing, music, and controlled breathing. Dr. Shaw continues monitoring the movement of his vocal folds and reminds Daniel that improvement does not guarantee restoration. He may never sound the way he did before, she says. Daniel looks toward Lucas, who is reading the appointment notes on his own screen. I know. Lucas raises an eyebrow. Daniel corrects himself. I'm learning to know. At school, Lucas returns part-time. His former choir director does not ask him to sing. Instead, she invites him to arrange a piece for the winter concert. During the first rehearsal, one student repeatedly finishes his sentences. Lucas stops speaking and types a message. Wait. The student reads it and apologizes. After that, the group gives Lucas the time he needs. Sometimes the delay is only a second. Sometimes he changes his mind and uses the tablet. No one praises him for ordinary participation. They listen and continue. Daniel notices that respect is often measured in those few seconds. He also restores their Saturday visits to the diner near Lake Washington. Carol still brings blueberry pancakes and one extra serving of syrup. One morning she asks Lucas whether he wants coffee. Daniel answers automatically. He doesn't. Lucas lifts one finger. Daniel stops. Lucas says, hot, chocolate. Carol writes it down. Whipped cream? He nods. After she leaves, Daniel says, sorry. Lucas opens the tablet. You're improving too. Daniel laughs. Apparently not quickly. Lucas types. Recovery doesn't move in one direction. Daniel recognizes Dr. Shaw's words and points his fork at him. That sounded suspiciously prepared. Lucas gives him a breathy laugh. A year after the charity concert, a new music and voice rehabilitation studio opens in Seattle. The building carries no family name. A small plaque near the entrance reads, "A voice does not disappear simply because the world cannot hear it." Inside the recording room, Annie sits at the piano while Lucas adjusts his cello. His repaired headphones hang from a hook near the microphone, the old black tape still holding one side together. Daniel watches through the studio glass. His phone rests in his pocket rather than on the console. Annie places a blank score between them. What should we call this one? Lucas leans toward the microphone. The first attempt breaks before the word forms. His jaw tightens, but Annie does not correct him. She plays the rhythm of his breathing and waits. Lucas listens, resets his breath, and tries again. Annie. Her name comes out quietly, rough at the edges but clear. She touches one piano key. I'm listening. Lucas raises his bow. Start. With the pause. Annie nods. You always liked the difficult part. Daniel's phone begins vibrating. He takes it out, turns it off without checking the screen, and places it face down. Beyond the windows, Seattle rain moves across the glass in narrow lines while Annie begins the first measure. Lucas enters with the cello, allowing the tone to change before it settles. No one rushes them toward the ending. The world had called one of them voiceless and the other invisible. But when they finally found each other, silence became the music no one could steal. This story reminds us that a person's voice is more than the sound they make. It is their dignity, truth, and right to be heard. Real love does not control or rush healing. It listens, waits, and respects each person's choices. Justice may come late, but it begins when ordinary people refuse to support a lie. Annie and Lucas show that even those the world calls invisible or broken can create something powerful when someone finally believes them. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration only.